It's certainly interesting because a lot of critics would say, including the White House, would say that this is essentially political gamesmanship, that this impeachment inquiry is a political football. However, House Republicans, particularly Kevin McCarthy in the Conservative Freedom Caucus in the House Republican Conference, say that this has to do with President Biden's influence and whether he used influence in his son Hunter Biden's business dealings when President Biden was vice president during the Obama administration. The issue here, though, is that these Republican run committees in the House haven't yet presented any clear evidence that show that link between President Biden and his son Hunter Biden's business dealings. So a lot of people essentially chop this up to President Biden being under pressure, or excuse me, Speaker McCarthy being under pressure by the Freedom Caucus and the conservative flank to start this impeachment inquiry. There are a number of Republicans in the Senate and the House who say that this is too early and that they don't necessarily think there are grounds for an impeachment inquiry at this point.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, Kevin McCarthy didn't put the decision to start this inquiry before the House. Are there Republicans who would have voted against it?
There are, I think, Republicans who would have voted against it. It's interesting. If you compare this to the impeachment inquiries during the Trump administration, when Democrats were in the majority and had more control, you had, for example, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, who decided to move forward with that inquiry, but she only moved forward when her very vulnerable Democratic House members who were up for re-election the following year and who were facing tough re-elections said they would get on board with this idea of an impeachment inquiry into former President Trump. A lot of House Republicans, particularly those that are in vulnerable positions, haven't gotten on board with this in terms of President Biden because they don't know whether it's politically feasible or not at this point. And to be honest, this is seen by a lot of Americans, like the Trump impeachment was as well, as a bit of an inside Washington baseball game, something that isn't really impacting Americans every day, like, say, the economy or healthcare or crime.
Yeah. Are some Republicans, particularly from that very far-right group, holding Kevin McCarthy to ransom ahead of the looming debt ceiling vote?
That could certainly be interpreted that way. And if you go back to January of this year, Kevin McCarthy was, certainly his ascension to the speakership was put in jeopardy by these same very conservative Republicans who say that, they want the Speaker of the House and the House Republican Caucus not to, bend the knee as much to Democrats and maybe moderate Republicans, that they want to push through their conservative agenda. And that includes, for many of them, impeaching President Biden as a means of making a statement after former President Trump was impeached twice during his administration.
Yeah. What did you make of the note sent to Washington reporters, political reporters, to say that they need to, it's up to the media to intensify scrutiny on this move by the Republicans?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the media in Washington is going to continue to do its job like it has in, every administration in terms of covering impeachments and covering major events like this. This event is very different, I think, from past impeachments, because we see that impeachment is something that throughout U.S. history, that it's a tool that's been used very rarely by Congress. This is something our founding fathers wanted to be a serious matter that was only used when it was essentially a last resort, when they were a suspected crime was committed, when there was clear evidence. Now there's even some Republicans and Democrats saying that impeachment has now been watered down, and essentially it's being used as a political football. Obviously, before former President Trump, the last president to be impeached was Bill Clinton in the 1990s. So it's not something that's used from administration to administration. So that's what makes this very notable.
Yeah. Julie, there's quite a lot of chatter from sort of some fairly high-profile opinion people in Washington about whether Joe Biden should be running again because of his age. We're seeing Nancy Pelosi seeking re-election. It is quite interesting to observe from afar just that there doesn't seem to have been a generational transfer.
Yeah, so, that this is something that Washington has dealt with for quite some time. President Biden, and this is a bipartisan issue, by the way. President Biden on the Republican side, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi on the Democratic side, Dianne Feinstein in the Senate on the Democratic side. They are by far not the first lawmakers and officials to have served in the U.S. Congress, or in their in their official capacities at their age, even though President Biden is the oldest president to serve. But this has been a problem or many would say it's been a problem for quite some time, that you have these people who are holding on to power for too long, to the point where they're not necessarily, some would argue, physically or mentally able to hold on to that power. So it's certainly a question that a lot of Americans have right now, especially when you see videos of Mitch McConnell, for example, freezing up during press conferences. His office attributes that to a concussion he suffered, or Joe Biden sometimes moving a bit slower, or jumbling his words during public appearances, or Dianne Feinstein in a wheelchair, for example, at 90 years old. That's something that a lot of Americans are concerned about in that image.
Yeah, indeed. Great to see you as always, Julia. Thanks so much.
Thank you.